Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 26 and I am the show's host Kyle. And I hope today we have a good show for you. I want to just thank all my listeners so much again. We're seeing shows increase in viewers and it's looking like you all are sharing my shows and getting them out there to new listeners, which is helping to increase the base. So thank you so much. If y'all could keep doing that, it's really going to help the show to grow and get out there. And once again, the importance of a show like this is that it focuses on non-interventionism, and that's what we need, because interventionism is destroying the United States. I mean, whether you're somebody who is a strict libertarian and doesn't believe the state should exist, or somebody who wants the state to be strong and powerful, you need to realize that non-interventionist foreign policy is the way to go to get there. If you're wasting trillions and trillions of dollars overseas, then you're never going to have a rich and prosperous country, because you're going to blow it all up. I mean, imagine if the U.S. had $1 trillion fireworks display every year. People would be up in arms, but this is essentially $1 trillion fireworks display that kills a couple 10,000, maybe a couple 100,000 people every year. And so that, this is our foreign policy, and that's why it's so important to get that out there. So thank you everybody for sharing the show, and I will jump into some of the more current news stories. Story at the top of the list has to be Rex Tillerson's comment saying that the U.S. will attack anyone who commits crimes against civilians anywhere. I'm assuming by what he means by this is that a government would be committing acts of violence against the citizens, and I'm assuming he means probably more than just a police shooting here or there. It has to be systematic, like Assad gassing his people. However, just on the practical effects of this, does this seem like anything that could be possible? I mean, just take some time on this one and just think about the practical implications of this. That if Putin decides to go out and kill 200 of his own civilians, are we going to bomb Russia? Are we going to go to war with Russia over human rights violations in their country? China is same situation. I mean, China's government isn't great. They don't have a great human rights record. I'm not saying the U.S. government does either. However, are we going to start a war that's going to kill millions, possibly billions of people with Russia or China because China killed 200 of its citizens? Is it even a positive? I mean, like, if you look at it from just a pure, like, what's better for the people of the world measure, it's a messy argument to make, and that's why I like the principle of non-interventionism, but I think you can make the argument that not starting these larger wars is probably better for humanity as a whole, and even the people in these countries. I think that the people of Syria are probably better off with the U.S. not destroying Assad, because as bad as it may be to live under Assad, just if you look at it, we're going to extend the war. Certainly Assad is winning the war right now, so if we start bombing Assad, then it's going to be a longer and more drawn-out war. We won't even examine the possibilities of Syria being turned into a battlefield between the U.S. and Russia, but that would certainly be an absolute disaster for Syria. Bombs would be dropping everywhere all the time. I mean, I'm assuming the whole country will eventually be destroyed by these weapons. But not even looking at that piece, just looking at, like, if this turns well and Assad's overthrown, then the civilians are going to be living under ISIS. And is that any better? Is living under ISIS and Al-Qaeda better than living under Syria? Assad? I don't think so. And so this is something that Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry all acknowledged when they were in power and they were bombing Syria, is that if you get rid of Assad, you're gonna end up with radical Sunni extremists in Damascus. And I find it absolute insanity that either the Trump administration doesn't realize this or simply doesn't care. But Tillerson's policy, he's certainly saying that the U.S. will carry out a war of aggression against any country that attacks its own citizens. Now I'd like to make the more obvious point, and that is just the hypocrisy of Tillerson's statement. I mean, look, if the U.S. wants to concentrate on a country that does bad things to its own civilians, look no further than the middle part of North America. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people right now are sitting in jail for choosing to ingest a substance and put a substance into their own body or sell that substance or traffic in it. And when you look at the range of things to imprison people for, nonviolent crimes are nonviolent crimes. And so, I mean, it may be better that we're not arresting people for speaking out against the state, But at the same time, it's not a whole lot better because they're putting people in jail for smoking marijuana. I mean, like this is a crime against our own civilians, obviously. If you look at some of the police shootings that go on in America and that where the police don't end up going to jail and there's no justice being done for the civilians, even if we could put the controversial like Mike Brown one aside, even if we look at Eric Gardner, where the man was clearly choked to death for selling loose cigarettes, did he ever commit a crime? Absolutely not. Was he murdered by the state because he didn't want to follow their arbitrary rules? Yeah. Rex Tillerson wants to, take people out that are, committing crimes against their own civilians, then maybe he should think about throwing New York's mayor in jail or something like that. I don't know. I mean, it just is awfully hypocritical. And also look at the states the U.S. supports. The way the Israelis treat the Palestinians is certainly not up to humanitarian standards. I mean, we had an Israeli soldier get 18 months in jail for executing a Palestinian man. We have crimes where Palestinian communities of Palestinian neighborhoods will be taken from their homes, taken from them, their property taken from them by Israelis. And these are certainly crimes against civilians, and the U.S. isn't even going to have the decency to stop supporting Israel. We're going to continue to support them in their bashing of the Palestinian people. Saudi Arabia, who the U.S. pretty much unilaterally supports, we just let Saudi Arabia do whatever they want in the Middle East and sell them weapons and assist them, especially in their war against Yemen. I mean, Saudi Arabia bombed a funeral where people were mourning in Yemen and killed between 150 and 300 people, depending on the reports you read. And the U.S. did nothing. They sold them slightly less weapons for a couple weeks. And so, if the U.S. is going to have this policy, you would think that we would at least try to enforce it evenly. I mean, this isn't a policy of practical. Tillerson isn't saying that it's practical and better for the U.S. to have this policy. He's saying that for moral reasons, the U.S. needs to punish anybody who does anything bad anywhere in the world. And certainly, you would think that if that's your policy, you would punish, your friends who are misbehaving just like your enemies. But Tillerson and Trump certainly aren't people who have very high moral values and obviously are too foolish to understand the futility of their terrible beliefs here, which is to bomb anyone who does anything bad. But in the case, we're not doing justice to the victims. The victims of the Syrian chemical weapons attack aren't receiving any justice by the U.S. launching a bunch of airstrikes at a Syrian airfield and killing 9 more civilians. If you look at the practical effects of the outcome of our foreign policy, it's never that the civilians of the countries that we intervene in get better or benefit in any way. Their lives get worse and oftentimes significantly worse. Speaking of the U.S. intervening in other countries, the U.S. is sending $16 million in non-lethal military aid to the Central African Republic. I guess there's some rioting and other stuff going on in that country, and the situation is to the point where the government may not have a great control over the country, so the U.S. is sending some personnel carriers and other military equipment. I thought this was interesting just because, Trump was the one who campaigned on, U.S. is all this money in debt and we're wasting it and all this, and then we're giving $16 million away to some government that probably 2% of Americans could possibly pick out on a map. I guess there's probably a couple thousand people in the United States of America that actually have a firm grasp on the situation there, who the rebels are, and if we're even supporting the right side, is that government committing crimes against its people, and then the rebels are responsible. I don't know, but I'm guaranteed that Rex Tillerson doesn't. And even if he does, and maybe the U.S. is making the right decision, there's certainly no consent here from the House of Representatives or the U.S. people as a whole, and it's just the U.S. getting involved in another military quagmire with the money of U.S. civilians, and they're going to be the losers here. While we're in Africa, I read a story saying that jihadism is really starting to spread in North and West Africa. I guess a big part of this is that ISIS fighters who are returning home as ISIS fighters. So there, I believe, 6,000 to 8,000 Tunisian fighters who went either to Afghanistan or Syria to fight the U.S. or Syria or whoever, but on the side of ISIS. And so now these people are coming home, and now they're ISIS fighters, and now maybe they're people who see the Tunisian government as a government to overthrow, or are just going to grow cells of ISIS and recruit more fighters into their ranks, or possibly, just carry out terrorist attacks either against Tunisia or the West. And this is happening, from Tunisia to Mali all the way, probably all the way to the Atlantic Ocean in Africa. So this is something that we're going to be concerned about. And look, if Trump and Tillerson's policy is to go anywhere and do whatever it takes to take out the bad guys, then they're going to have an awful lot of bad guys to take out in an awful lot of countries. Now, I'm not sure if any Americans know where West Sahara is, but is a country on the west coast of Africa. And look, if, a couple hundred ISIS fighters go home there, and then the U.S. decides to stop dropping bombs on West Sahara, it's obviously not going to benefit any Americans. And so this is just something we got to be concerned about, something we got to know about, and we got to talk to our representatives about it and say, hey guys, there's going to be a lot of talk coming out pretty soon saying that there are a whole bunch of ISIS fighters in all these West and North African countries, and the Trump administration is going to say, hey, we need to start dropping drone bombs on these countries, and you have to stand up and say no, because this is a result of our interventionist foreign policy. So that's the importance of this. That's why this matters. And now I'm going to move into Syria. Tillerson, making more terrible statements, said that Assad rule in Syria is coming to an end. I guess he said this either right before he got to on his trip to Russia or at his trip to Russia. It's certainly something that Russia won't be all that happy to hear about or see. I think here's the problem from the Russian perspective. Even if Russia isn't all that attached to Assad, but just wants that same set of kind of Shia Islam, the Alawites, to continue to rule Syria. That way Assad could continue to, Putin could continue to have his military outposts in alliance with Syria, then that would be an option, but I don't think that's an option for Putin. I think it's pretty clear that if Assad falls, there's probably not another person that could take the throne in Damascus and really hold it. The Syrian Arab army, the Syrian government army, is made up of mostly of Sunni Arabs. They're not Shia Arabs, so it's kind of an interesting complexion when all these Sunnis who the rebels are kind of identified as the Sunnis as well, are choosing to fight on Assad's side. Now, could another leader bring that same follow through? And the answer is probably no. So I think Putin's strategy in Syria has to be for Assad to remain on the throne and win this civil war. And if the U.S.'s policy is for Assad to fall, then that's really going to be a problem for Putin. On the practical side of it, the U.S. would really, really, really have to intervene in Syria to get Assad to fall. I guess the problem for the United States would be that other than Al-Qaeda and ISIS, all the rebel groups are just so weak right now that they can't do anything to combat Assad, and so the U.S. would have to directly support ISIS and Al-Qaeda to overthrow Assad without getting involved with U.S. troops and bombing Assad ourselves. And even if we bomb Assad ourselves, we would have to go in with a significant ground force, because we would have to be able to maintain and establish control in Damascus, and we would probably lose a lot of the Syrian Arab army, especially the Sunni parts of it, because I don't know if the Sunnis would fight for the U.S. against the Syrian rebels or not. But that certainly isn't a gamble I would want to take, that a bunch of Sunni Arabs would continue to fight just because the U.S. held the throne in Damascus in that army. And so for the U.S. to think, and for any U.S. strategy in any U.S. war in Syria, is going to have to be either a U.S. ground invasion or a significant increase in U.S. supplied arms to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And so those are kind of the choices the U.S. has there. I guess we could make the argument that the U.S. could try to arm the Kurds and make the Kurds so strong that they would go to war with Assad, but I don't know if the Kurds would even be interested in that deal, and Turkey would go insane, and probably we would now be fighting a war against our NATO allies as well. So, I mean, just what a mess. Tillerson and Trump are clearly just have either no idea what's going on in Syria, or believe some ridiculous rosy picture that some military analysis drew them, which will never come true. Like, we were never great in liberators in Iraq. And Trump and Tillerson are just buying these lies. More stories about Syria. Trump said the U.S. could attack Assad over barrel bombs, dropping barrel bombs on civilians. Where this came from is Sean Spicer said this at a press conference that Trump would follow through with these attacks if Assad did something like more chemical weapons or dropping barrel bombs. My concern with this, and this I guess kind of ties into the first story I talked about and what Tillerson said in the U.S. punishing governments for actions against their civilians everywhere. If you're Al-Qaeda and ISIS and you see the only way that you're going to have a chance against Assad is for the U.S. to start bombing Assad, then you now have a clear benchmark of what you could do to get the U.S. to bomb Assad. So if you're ISIS and you could simulate a barrel bombing in Raqqa or in Deir ez-Zor, or if you're al-Nusra and you could set off some more chemical weapons in the Idlib province, Trump just gave you the incentive to do that, and you'll see the results you want from doing that. And so that's just one of the concerns. The other is that the U.S. airstrike against Syria didn't kill any Syrian army men. It didn't kill Assad. It didn't hurt his abilities to fight Al-Qaeda or ISIS. All it did is kill a bunch of civilians. So every time Assad kills civilians, Trump is going to kill civilians for the sake of the own civilians. I mean, it's completely baffling and stupid. One more note coming out of the Tillerson trip to Russia, and that is Tillerson's not going to be meeting with Putin. From everything I could tell, this is over the Trump bombing Assad in Syria. Obviously, just a really stupid thing to do on Trump's part. It's causing all this hostility with Russia for absolutely no reason. Trump really wanted to drop bombs in Syria and wanted to make the best impact possible. I mean, no U.S. intervention in Syria is good, but a better U.S. intervention in Syria would have been at least calling Putin and saying, hey, we're going to make sure we do this thing together, because as bad as your puppet Assad is, well, Al-Qaeda and ISIS are a whole lot worse, so we're gonna go with this evil, but that's not what he did. Alright guys, I'm wrap up the show today talking about North Korea. We have Trump making a statement saying that we can solve the problem in North Korea, or North Korea is a problem and we can solve the problem in North Korea even if China doesn't want to help. This was in another one of his Twitter blast. So Trump bolstering for a war against North Korea on Twitter. This is quite the world we live in. I think this would be a good moment to just pause and reflect for everyone that we now have a world leader threatening a country on Twitter of all places. Amazing. I guess the most concerning thing coming out of what's going on in North Korea is just the rhetoric coming out of the Trump administration, nearly suggesting that they don't think there's any diplomatic solution left with North Korea, and eventually Kim Jong-un is going to have to die. I mean, we're talking about regime change in North Korea. U.S. Conducted regime change in North Korea. The insanity of this policy is baffling. I've been having a few conversations and getting a few questions on this issue, so I thought this would be a good time to address it, and that is this idea that the U.S. could possibly go to war in North Korea. I guess the first thing I want to say is I don't put it past Trump. After he attacked Assad, I don't think there's any reason or any way we could possibly say, well, Trump definitely won't attack Kim Jong-un now. However, man, it would be such a terrible move. And I guess let me give a few reasons why this would be a terrible move, and that'll probably clear this up for you. The first is that look at who North Korea shares borders with. Of course, South Korea, but also Russia and China. And so if the U.S. is going to go to war with North Korea, who has, I believe, a 1 million man army and nukes, it's going to take a long time and a lot of troops, and we're going to have to send in a massive number of troops because North Korea does have nuclear weapons. And so if we go and overthrow the government in North Korea, we have to also go and secure every one of those nuclear weapons. And at every potential site there may be a nuclear weapon, because the worst thing for the entire world that could happen is one of these nukes ending up on the black market somewhere. And so I don't know if we're looking at 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 U.S. troops, but we would have to park a significant majority of the U.S. military in the Sea of Japan over there to, kind of successfully regime change Kim Jong-un. If that's the strategy that America really wants to go with, that's the only way to do it. And if you're Russia or China, I don't know if you're okay with this. I can't imagine that Russia or China would be okay with that move. They would certainly be terrified to have that many troops standing on their border in a country that borders them, and the U.S. troops are certainly going to have to act all over North Korea, including on their borders with Russia and China, and so that's going to be a problem if we conduct this move. China's already upset that the U.S. put a whole bunch of THAAD missiles in South Korea and I believe Japan as well, in kind of countermeasure to Kim Jong-un in North Korea, so I don't think they're going to be very happy with like 4 aircraft carriers floating off their coast, and then another 300,000 U.S. troops there. So I think that would be a huge problem if the U.S. decided to go with this. Other problems would just be, like I said, that there's nukes in this country, and so if there's even one nuke that the U.S. doesn't get their hands on, then there's a loose nuke somewhere in the world, and that's has to be a really, really bad thing. I can only imagine what could happen with the nuclear bomb dropped somewhere in the world by a terrorist group. So you also just had the strategic problem that, North Korea, I believe, pours a whole lot of their economy into their military, and this would probably be a more difficult fight than Saddam in Iraq. I'm assuming that the U.S. would end up winning this. However, it could be at the expense of Seoul. Even if North Korea doesn't get a nuke off and is able to nuke Seoul, the missile defense systems are nowhere near 100%, and I think they're actually pretty terrible. So North Korea launched a whole lot of missiles at the capital of South Korea. Some of those are going to get through, and so, there's just a huge civilian expenditure here, and certainly the civilians in North Korea would be in really bad shape. A lot of people in that country are already starving and dying, and so the U.S. destroys the infrastructure and bombs a whole bunch of, places and civilians as well. We're going to have a huge humanitarian catastrophe on our hands in North Korea. And does the U.S. want to get involved in that mess? And I hope the answer is no. One of the more interesting, kind of angles on this is that China has come out with some more aggressive rhetoric and policies against North Korea. So after Trump and the Chinese president talked, while Trump launched a whole bunch of missiles at Syria, maybe he convinced the Chinese president to slam down on Kim Jong-un and maybe carry out the regime change in North Korea by himself. I still think this is probably a bad policy to just be involved in this situation, but at least it's not the U.S. doing it. So if this policy does move forward, that's probably the best possible outcome for the U.S. and the United States citizens, but certainly not going to be good for the North Koreans. So it's a complex world out there. The U.S. government's nuts, and they love to just stick their fingers into every pie and try to make everything better, and they end up making everything worse. Alright, I'm going to wrap up the show for today. If you like the show, please subscribe on iTunes and leave me a 5-star rating and review. That will help the show to grow and get out there to new listeners. If you could also go on Facebook and join my Facebook group, Foreign Policy Focus. Also check out my Facebook page, Kyle's Files. That's on Facebook. I'm on Twitter at KYAAALE. My personal website is kylesfilesblog.com. I posted a daily news roundup there. That's some pretty cool stuff. The website for the podcast, the website for the podcast is foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. Thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it. Let's keep getting it out there in the word of foreign policy and the word of peace. Thank you.